The polished brass knocker felt cold and heavy in Chloe's hand. It was shaped like a stylized wave, intricate and impossibly elegant, and it seemed to mock her with its silent, solid permanence. 3 years. 3 years since she had signed the papers that had legally and emotionally severed her life from Liam Sterling's. 3 years since she had walked away from their small, rented house with a sense of triumphant release, leaving him with a broken lease, a mountain of shared debt she'd artfully assigned to him, and the crushing weight of her disdain. Now she stood on the granite steps of his home. No, not a home. It was a masterpiece, a symphony of glass and cedar and stone that seemed to grow organically from the cliffside, overlooking the vast, churning expanse of the Pacific Ocean. She had seen it in magazines, of course. Architectural Digest, Forbes. It was called The Precipice, and it was the crown jewel of the Seacliff estate, a project that had not only remade the coastline, but had also remade the man she thought she had destroyed. Chloe thought he was a failure. She had told him as much on that final, screaming night. A man of small ambitions, content with his little drawings and his modest salary. A man who would never understand her need for more. She didn't know that while she was chasing status, he was nurturing a vision. While she was judging him by the brand of his watch, he was quietly negotiating with billionaires. While she was leaving him for a man who flashed his wealth, he was building a legacy. Within 3 years, the world she had so desperately sought would crumble to dust, and the man she had cast aside would become its king. And now her final, desperate gamble was to knock on the door of his castle, a beggar pleading for an audience. Her knuckles, raw from the sea wind, rapped against the brass wave. The sound was swallowed by the immense silence of his success. And as she waited, tears she had sworn she would never let him see again began their hot, treacherous path down her cheeks. It's a story we think we know, isn't it? The person left behind, the one who gets the last laugh. But what happens after the laugh? What happens when the dust settles and all that's left are the choices we've made? We're going to explore that today, and I'm so glad you're here to join me. If you enjoy stories about vindication, redemption, and the true meaning of success, do me a favor and gently tap that like button. And if you're new here, consider subscribing, because we tell stories like this every week. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's turn back the clock 3 years and see how this all began. The first 6 months after the divorce were a study in shades of gray for Liam. The world seemed to have lost its color, its texture. He moved from the house he had once shared with Chloe, a space that now echoed with the ghosts of her laughter and the sharper echoes of her final, cutting words, into a small, one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a walk-up. The walls were thin, the plumbing was temperamental, and the view was a grimy brick wall. It was a physical manifestation of his diminished status in the world, a world that had once seemed to hold so much promise. He'd lost weight. His clothes, once comfortably filling his frame, now hung off him. He subsisted on coffee and toast, the effort of preparing a proper meal feeling like a monumental task he no longer had the energy for. He went to work at the small architectural firm, did his job competently but without the spark of passion that had once defined him, and came home. He would spread his personal blueprints across the small, wobbly dining table, the secret project he had been working on for years, the one Chloe had dismissed as a hobby, and stare at them until the lines blurred and his head throbbed. The vision was still there, but it felt distant, like a dream he was struggling to remember upon waking. The divorce had been brutal. Chloe, guided by a lawyer who was as slick as he was merciless, had painted Liam as an unsupportive, unambitious anchor holding her back. She had wanted the life she saw on social media, the one her friends were living, the European vacations, the designer handbags, the homes with more bathrooms than people. Liam, with his quiet dedication to his craft, his belief in sustainable design and affordable housing projects, was an obstacle to that life. So she had removed him. And she had done so with surgical precision, ensuring she walked away with most of their liquid assets while he was saddled with the debt from her expensive tastes. He was, in a word, broken, financially, emotionally, and for a time, creatively. The first time he saw her after the papers were finalized was on a Tuesday. It was a rare, sunny afternoon in a season of endless rain, and on a whim, he had left his office to walk to a small, independent coffee shop 3 blocks away, a place he and Chloe had once frequented. He was holding a lukewarm paper cup, staring into its contents as if it held the secrets of the universe, when a shadow fell over him. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," a voice said. It was a male voice, slick with a condescending amusement. Liam looked up. His heart did a painful, stuttering leap in his chest. It was Chloe. She looked radiant, glowing with a vitality he hadn't seen in their last year together. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent. And clinging to her arm was a man who looked like he had been assembled from a catalog of expensive cliches. Tan skin, perfectly coiffed hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and a suit that screamed, "I own your company." "Liam," Chloe said, her voice a little tight. She hadn't expected this. This was her new territory, and he was an unwelcome artifact from her past life. "Chloe," he replied, his own voice surprisingly steady. He stood up, a reflexive act of politeness ingrained in him since childhood. The man on her arm, whose name Liam would soon learn was Mark, did not extend a hand. He simply looked Liam up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment on Liam's worn jacket and then on his wrist. "Mark, this is Liam," Chloe said, the hesitation before his name a small, sharp sting. "Ah," Mark said, the sound loaded with meaning. He was the victor, the prize. Liam was the discarded, rough draft. "Chloe's told me all about you. Architect, right? Doing those little drawings?" The diminishment was deliberate, a verbal pat on the head. Liam felt a familiar flush of anger, but he pushed it down. Showing any emotion would be a victory for them. He had learned in the final months of his marriage that his dignity was the only currency he had left. "Something like that," Liam said, his tone even. He looked at Chloe. "You look well." "I am," she said, and there was a note of defiance in it, as if her happiness were a weapon aimed directly at him. "Mark is in finance, mergers and acquisitions." She said it like it was a title of nobility. "Fascinating," Liam said, the word utterly neutral. Mark, however, was not done. He seemed to relish the opportunity to establish his dominance. His eyes flicked again to Liam's wrist. "Is that the time?" he said, theatrically raising his own arm. A watch the size of a dinner plate, a monstrosity of gold and diamonds, flashed in the weak sunlight. "Whoops, honey, we're going to be late for our reservation at the Spire. You know how stuffy they are about punctuality." He looked at Liam's watch, a simple, understated leather-banded timepiece that had been a gift from his late father. "Nice watch," Mark said, drawing out the word, his smirk revealing the insult. "Classic." The word classic was made to sound like worthless. Liam didn't react. He didn't look at his watch. He didn't look at Mark's. He simply met the man's gaze. Inside, he felt a strange, cold calm begin to settle. This humiliation was a gift. It was a clarifying agent, burning away the lingering fog of nostalgia and regret. He wasn't mourning the loss of Chloe anymore. He was mourning a woman who had never really existed. The real Chloe was standing right in front of him, and she was a stranger. "You should go," Liam said, his voice soft but firm. "You don't want to be late." He sat back down, picked up his coffee, and took a sip. He did not watch them leave. He didn't need to. He could feel their triumphant retreat, the sound of Chloe's expensive heels clicking on the pavement, a receding drumbeat of a battle he had just, in some strange way, begun to win. He sat there for a long time, the coffee growing cold in his hands. The grayness hadn't lifted, but for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of something else. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. He went back to his apartment, unrolled the blueprints for the Seacliff project, and for the first time since the divorce, he picked up a pencil and made a new line. The phone call came a few months later, on a Saturday morning. Liam was elbow deep in a scale model of a particularly complex cantilevered structure, the scent of basswood and glue filling his small apartment. The caller ID showed Eleanor Vance, Chloe's mother. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He hadn't spoken to his former mother-in-law since before the divorce was final, a conversation in which she had icily informed him that he had been a profound disappointment. He let it ring, but the buzzing of the phone on the plywood work surface was insistent. Finally, he wiped his hands on a rag and answered. "Liam, it's Eleanor." Her voice was the same as he remembered, crisp, commanding, and perpetually disapproving. There was no preamble, no, "How are you?" "Eleanor," he said, keeping his voice level, "your former father-in-law and I are celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary next Saturday," she announced. "We're having a small gathering at the house, just family and close friends." Liam waited. The silence stretched. "That's wonderful," he finally said. "Please give David my best." "We expect you to be there," she said. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Liam was stunned into silence. "Eleanor, I don't think that's a good idea. Chloe and I are—" "I'm not concerned with Chloe and you," she cut in sharply. "I am concerned with my grandson. Thomas adores you. He asks about his Uncle Liam all the time. It would be cruel to deny him this, especially since Chloe's sister is flying in from Chicago with him for the occasion. Are you going to be cruel, Liam?" It was a masterfully executed piece of emotional blackmail. Thomas, his 8-year-old nephew by marriage, was one of the few, pure, uncomplicated joys from his life with Chloe. The boy was bright, inquisitive, and shared Liam's fascination with how things were put together. Liam was the one who had taught him how to build elaborate Lego cities, explaining the principles of load-bearing walls and cantilevered bridges. To be cut off from Thomas had been one of the sharpest pains of the divorce. Eleanor knew this. She was using the boy as bait, and she was doing it without shame. 7 o'clock. Don't be late, and for heaven's sake wear a proper suit, she added, before hanging up. For the next week, Liam wrestled with the decision. Every instinct told him to stay away. It was a trap, a stage set for his ritual humiliation. But the thought of Thomas's disappointed face was a powerful counter-argument. In the end, his affection for the boy won out. He had one good suit, a dark charcoal wool that he'd bought for his own father's funeral. He had it cleaned and pressed. He polished his best pair of leather shoes. He felt like a soldier preparing for battle. The night of the party, he stood outside Eleanor and David's sprawling Tudor-style home, the kind of house that was designed to look old and established from the moment the last brick was laid. Music and laughter spilled from the open windows into the manicured garden. Taking a deep breath, he walked up the stone path and rang the bell. The door was opened by Chloe. She was wearing a shimmering, backless silver dress that seemed to be held up by sheer force of will. She looked like a movie star. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw him. "Liam," she said, recovering quickly. "You came." "Eleanor insisted," he said simply. From behind her, Mark appeared, a glass of champagne in his hand. He looked Liam up and down, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well, decided to grace us with your presence, brave man." He clapped Liam on the shoulder in a gesture that was meant to look friendly, but was really a display of ownership. This was his turf. The house was filled with Chloe's world. Men in expensive suits talking about stock prices. Women with surgically smooth foreheads discussing their latest trip to Tuscany. Liam felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. He found his nephew Thomas in the den, meticulously assembling a new, complex Lego spaceship. "Uncle Liam!" the boy cried, his face lighting up. He abandoned the spaceship and threw his arms around Liam's waist. The hug was genuine, fierce, and for a moment it made the entire ordeal worthwhile. Liam spent the next hour on the floor with Thomas, discussing the finer points of warp drive engineering and structural integrity, the noise of the party fading into a distant hum. It was Mark who shattered the peace. He loomed in the doorway, a fresh drink in his hand. "Still playing with toys, Sterling?" he drawled, loud enough for several nearby guests to turn and look. Liam looked up, his expression unreadable. "It's good to have a grasp of the fundamentals," he said calmly. Mark laughed, a short, barking sound. "Right, fundamentals." He gestured vaguely toward Liam. "This is Chloe's ex," he announced to a couple standing nearby. "He's an architect, spends his days making little drawings of buildings no one will ever build." The couple offered Liam weak, pitying smiles. Chloe had appeared in the doorway now, her arms crossed, a silent observer. She wouldn't meet his eye. She was the enabler, the quiet co-signer on his humiliation. "Actually," Mark continued, warming to his theme, "I've been meaning to ask you for some free advice, Liam. Chloe and I are building a new place. Big place. Ocean view. We're thinking of a double-height atrium. What do you think? Too much? Or just the right amount of wow?" He was baiting him, trying to draw him into a conversation where he could be belittled and dismissed as a small-timer. Liam slowly got to his feet, brushing the dust from his trousers. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching this scene play out from a great distance. His hand went to his pocket, his fingers closing around a small, smooth object. It was a block of polished walnut, intricately carved with interlocking joints. It was a prototype for a new type of timber joinery he had designed, a piece of his secret world, his real work. The feel of it in his hand was grounding. He looked directly at Mark, his gaze clear and steady. "I'm sure whatever you and Chloe decide on will be very impressive," he said. The word hung in the air, a perfect, neutral statement that could be taken as a compliment or the deepest insult. He then turned his attention back to Thomas. "Hey, champ," he said, his voice warm again. "Show me how that inertial dampener works." He had refused to play the game. He had denied Mark the satisfaction of a reaction. Mark was left standing there, his insult having failed to land. He scowled, drained his glass, and stalked away to find a more appreciative audience. Chloe lingered for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Was it guilt? Pity? It didn't matter. She turned and followed her fiancé. Liam sat back on the floor, the weight of their judgment, a physical thing, but his core remained untouched. He had survived. And in his pocket, the small wooden block felt like a promise. In the gleaming black interior of Mark's German sedan, speeding away from the party, the air was thick with unspoken tensions. Chloe stared out the window, the glittering lights of the city blurring into streaks. The silver dress suddenly felt cheap. The champagne tasted sour in her memory. "I cannot believe your mother invited him," Mark finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was tight with annoyance. "The whole night he was just lurking. It was pathetic." "My mother thought it was important for Thomas," Chloe murmured, still not looking at him. "Thomas," Mark scoffed. "The kid's 8. He'll forget who Liam is in a year." It was embarrassing, Chloe, having him there, in that shabby suit, looking like some kind of sad ghost at the feast. "My colleagues were there. What must they have thought?" Chloe didn't answer. What she was thinking was that Liam's suit wasn't shabby. It was simple, well-made, and it fit him perfectly. It just wasn't loud. It wasn't a statement. Unlike Mark, whose entire being was a shout for attention, Liam had always been a quiet hum of substance. It was a thought so traitorous, so contrary to the new life she was building, that she immediately pushed it down. "He's just so sanctimonious," Mark continued, warming to his monologue. "Sitting on the floor playing with Legos, acting like he's above it all. I'm sure it will be very impressive. What a prick. He's just jealous. He knows he'll spend his entire life in some dingy little office designing kitchen extensions for suburbanites while I'm building a monument. The house is going to be beautiful, Chloe said, the words feeling like a required line in a play. Damn right it is, Mark said, his mood lifting as he shifted the topic to his favorite subject, himself. I spoke to the contractor today. We broke ground. They're pouring the foundation next week. 6,000 square feet, a wine cellar, an infinity pool. It's not just a house, Chloe. It's a statement. It says, I have arrived. He reached over and squeezed her bare knee, his touch possessive. And you're the queen of the castle. Doesn't that feel good? To know you made the right choice? To know you're with a winner? Yes, Mark, she said, forcing a smile. It feels amazing. But as she said it, the image of Liam's calm, steady gaze flashed in her mind. He hadn't looked like a loser. He had looked free. Miles away in the fourth-floor walk-up that Mark would have dismissed as a hovel, a different kind of kingdom was taking shape. Liam's apartment was a landscape of controlled chaos. The living room was dominated by a massive drafting table, illuminated by a single, bright lamp that cast the rest of the room in deep shadow. The walls were covered not with art, but with corkboards pinned with topographical maps, geological surveys, wind load calculations, and dozens of hand-drawn sketches. Blueprints were rolled up and stored in cardboard tubes like ancient scrolls. The scale model he had been working on now covered most of the floor, a miniature city of wood and wire and card. This was his sanctuary. This was his real life. The humiliation of the party, the sting of Mark's words, it all dissolved the moment he stepped through his door. Here he was not Chloe's ex. He was Liam Sterling, master architect. He powered on his laptop, and a moment later, a video call chimed through. The face that appeared on the screen was that of Arthur Vance, a man in his late 60s with a mane of white hair, sharp, intelligent eyes, and a reputation for being one of the most formidable and visionary developers in the country. He was in what looked like a luxurious study, a roaring fire in the background. Liam, Arthur's voice boomed, rich and warm. Burning the midnight oil, I see. How was the foray into enemy territory? Liam managed a small smile. About as expected. I survived. Good man, Arthur said. Don't let the bastards get you down. Their world is small and loud. Ours is quiet and permanent. Now, show me what you've got. Did the new environmental impact reports come in? For the next 2 hours, they weren't developer and architect. They were co-conspirators, two minds united by a singular, audacious vision. They spoke a language Chloe and Mark would never understand. They talked of tidal power integration, passive solar design, geothermal heating, and a revolutionary graywater recycling system. They debated the precise angle of a roofline to maximize morning light and the specific blend of local stone and reclaimed timber that would make the structures seem as if they had grown from the earth itself. This was the Sea Cliff Project, and it was so much more than a collection of luxury homes. It was a prototype for a new way of living, a multi-billion-dollar development that Liam had conceived from the ground up. He had found the land, a wild, unbuildable stretch of coastline that other developers had dismissed. He had spent years secretly studying its unique ecology, its challenges, and its breathtaking potential. He had created the master plan, not just for the buildings, but for the entire community. And then, armed with a proposal so bold and so meticulously detailed that it was impossible to ignore, he had approached the one man in the country with the vision and the resources to make it a reality, Arthur Vance. Arthur scrolled through a new set of renderings Liam had sent him. "My God, son," he breathed, his voice filled with genuine awe. "The way the central lodge integrates with the ridgeline, it's not just a building, it's a landscape. And the residential pods, genius, absolute genius. "We need to be careful with the northern slope," Liam said, all business now. "The geotechnical survey shows a higher than expected water table. We may need to reinforce the foundation design for units 7 through 12. "Whatever it takes," Arthur said without hesitation. "No compromises. This isn't just another development, Liam. This is our legacy. This is what they'll be writing about 100 years from now." They signed off just after 2 a.m. Liam stood up and stretched, his body aching but his mind soaring. He walked over to his window and looked out at the grimy brick wall. But he wasn't seeing brick. He was seeing a sweeping vista of the Pacific Ocean. He was seeing the sun rise over the homes he had designed. He was seeing the future. And in that future, people like Mark and Chloe were nothing more than faint, receding echoes. The seasons turned. The foundation of Mark and Chloe's monument to success was poured, and walls began to rise. It was a fast-tracked, aggressive build, designed for maximum impact in minimum time. They visited the site on weekends, Chloe wearing a hard hat that never got dirty, Mark pointing and issuing orders to the beleaguered foreman. Their life was a whirlwind of planning, not just the house, but the wedding. A destination affair in Lake Como, with a guest list curated for maximum social impact. Meanwhile, on the wild coast miles away, Liam's project proceeded at a different pace. It was slower, more deliberate, a conversation with the land rather than a conquest of it. Heavy machinery was used sparingly. Teams of ecologists walked the site, flagging rare species of plants for preservation. The work was quiet, methodical, and almost entirely hidden from the public eye, just the way Arthur Vance wanted it. The first major snag in Mark and Chloe's perfect life arrived in a stiff, cream-colored envelope from the city planning department. Their application for a zoning variance to accommodate the height of the atrium and the proximity of the infinity pool to the property line had been denied. "Denied!" Mark roared, slamming the letter down on the marble countertop of their temporary luxury condo. "What do you mean denied? I donate to the mayor's re-election campaign. My lawyer is on the board of the Arts Council." The architect, a slick man named Peterson, who specialized in what he called aspirational living, was summoned. He was flustered. "It's this new commissioner," he explained nervously. "A real stickler for the rules. He's flagging everything. Says our cantilever deck exceeds the maximum allowable overhang by 12 inches. "Then fix it," Mark snarled. "It's not that simple," Peterson stammered. "The structure is already framed. To bring it into compliance would mean a major redesign, months of delays, hundreds of thousands of dollars." It was Chloe who made the fateful connection. "Liam," she said quietly. "Liam used to do consulting work for the Regional Planning Authority. He knows all those people, all those arcane rules." Mark's head snapped up. His initial reaction was disgust. "You want me to ask him for help? Your pathetic ex-husband? Never." "It's not about asking for a favor," Chloe reasoned, her tone placating. "It's a strategic move. We hire him as a consultant. Pay him a handsome fee. He gets the problem to go away, we get our house, and it's just business. It's what you do, Mark. You leverage assets." The idea of Liam as an asset to be leveraged appealed to Mark's transactional nature. The thought of having Liam in his debt, of being the one to throw him a lifeline, was even more appealing. It would be the ultimate power play. They didn't call. They simply showed up. On a Thursday afternoon, they walked into the small, unassuming office of Sterling Design Solutions. The name itself was an affront to Mark. So modest, so small. The office was little more than a single room, cluttered with books and models, a single assistant tapping away at a computer. Liam was on the phone, his back to them, sketching furiously on a pad. The assistant, a young woman named Sarah, looked up in alarm. "Can I help you?" "We're here to see Mr. Sterling," Mark said, his voice dripping with condescension. Liam finished his call and turned around. His eyes registered no surprise, just a weary resignation. "Mark, Chloe, this is unexpected. We have a business proposition for you," Mark said, getting straight to the point. He tossed a rolled-up set of blueprints onto Liam's desk. "This is our new home. We've hit a small bureaucratic snag with the city. We need someone who knows the system to grease the wheels. We're prepared to be very generous." Liam didn't look at Mark. He looked at the blueprints. He slowly unrolled them. His face remained a perfect mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes, sharp and practiced, began to move across the pages. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the rustling of paper. Chloe shifted her weight, suddenly feeling deeply uncomfortable. This was a mistake. She could feel it. Finally, Liam looked up. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This isn't a bureaucratic snag," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an iron pronouncement. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mark demanded. Liam tapped a section of the plans with his finger. "It means your structural calculations for the main load-bearing beam over the atrium are wrong. You're using undersized materials. This cantilever deck," he tapped another area, "has no shear wall support. A moderate seismic event or even a strong enough windstorm, and it will fail." He continued, his finger moving across the page like a surgeon diagnosing a terminal illness. "Your foundation isn't rated for the soil type in that area. Your wiring schematics are not up to the 2023 code. Your plumbing plan has the gray water outflow too close to the property line, which is a health code violation." He rolled the plans back up, a gesture of finality. He looked at Mark not with malice or triumph, but with a kind of detached, professional pity. "This isn't a matter of zoning, Mark. This is a matter of safety. The design is fundamentally unsound. It's a house of cards." Mark's face went from tanned to a blotchy, furious red. "How dare you?" he hissed. "You're just jealous. You can't stand that I'm building a palace for your ex-wife, so you're trying to sabotage it." Liam didn't rise to the bait. He stood up, calm and resolute. "I have no interest in your palace, Mark. I'm telling you as a professional that this design is dangerous. If you build this house as specified, you are putting yourself and anyone in it at risk." He pushed the rolled-up blueprints back across the desk toward them. "My advice, which is free, is to halt construction immediately and hire a structural engineer to do a full review. My professional opinion," he said, his voice dropping to an almost chillingly quiet level, "is that your architect, Mr. Peterson, is either dangerously incompetent or actively committing fraud. I suggest you find out which." Chloe grabbed Mark's arm. "Let's go," she whispered, her face pale. Mark, speechless with rage, snatched the blueprints from the desk and stormed out of the office. Chloe hesitated for a moment at the door, looking back at Liam. His expression was unreadable. He had given them the truth, a gift they were too arrogant to accept. She turned and fled, the bell on the office door tinkling softly behind her, a sound like a tiny, distant funeral bell. A year passed. It was a year of defiant silence from Mark and Chloe. They didn't take Liam's advice. Instead, Mark used his money and influence like a battering ram. He hired a more expensive, more ruthless lawyer who found a loophole in the zoning laws. He paid the contractor extra to work double shifts, to get the house finished, to prove Liam wrong. The house was completed, a gleaming, white behemoth on the hillside, a testament to Mark's indomitable will. They moved in and threw a housewarming party that was featured in the society pages. They were triumphant. Liam, in that same year, had all but disappeared. His small office was closed, the phone disconnected. Rumors circulated among the handful of people who even remembered him. He'd had a breakdown. He'd moved away. He'd finally given up on his little drawings. The truth was far more spectacular. He was living on site at the Seacliff development, housed in a state-of-the-art temporary trailer, overseeing every single detail of the project's first phase. He worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a relentless passion. He was not building a house, he was birthing a city. The evening of the Vance Foundation Charity Gala was a perfect autumn night. The air was crisp, and the sky was a canopy of stars. The event was the undisputed pinnacle of the city's social calendar, held in a grand ballroom with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers. To be invited was to be anointed. To be seen there was to be relevant. Mark and Chloe made their entrance. Chloe was stunning in a deep emerald gown, Mark preening in a custom tuxedo. They had arrived. Their new house was the talk of the town. Mark's latest business deal had been a massive success. They were a power couple, untouchable. They moved through the glittering crowd, accepting compliments, their smiles bright and brittle. They found a spot near the bar, next to a city council member Mark had been cultivating. "Mark, Chloe, the house is magnificent," the councilman gushed. "I drove by the other day. Truly a statement." "We had a few headaches with your friends at the planning department," Mark said with a magnanimous laugh. "Even had an old acquaintance, an architect of all people, tell us the whole design was going to fall down around our ears. Can you imagine the jealousy of some people?" He winked. The councilman chuckled politely. Chloe smiled, but her heart gave a little lurch. Mentioning Liam felt like invoking a ghost. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Arthur Vance, looking leonine and powerful, walked to the podium at the center of the stage. "Good evening," his voice boomed, needing no microphone. "Thank you all for coming and for your incredible generosity to the foundation. Tonight we celebrate the future. For years, my company has built things. Office towers, shopping malls, condominiums. We've been successful. But I reached a point where I asked myself, is this all there is? Are we just building boxes to hold people? Or can we do more? Can we build a better way to live?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Mark and Chloe listened, captivated along with everyone else. Mark had tried to get a meeting with Vance for months about acquiring the Seacliff property himself, but had been rebuffed at every turn. He was intensely curious to know who had beaten him to it. "For the past 3 years," Vance continued, "we have been working on a secret project. A project so ambitious, so revolutionary, that we kept it under wraps until we could be sure it was not just a dream, but a reality. Tonight, I am thrilled to officially announce that reality. We call it the Seacliff Estate." A collective gasp went through the room. A massive screen behind Vance flickered to life, showing a breathtaking aerial video of the coastline, of elegant organic structures nestled into the landscape, of green roofs and shimmering solar panels, and a coastline that looked not just preserved, but enhanced. "Seacliff is not a subdivision," Vance declared. "It is a new paradigm, a community powered entirely by renewable energy, a place where luxury and sustainability are not competing ideas, but two sides of the same coin. It is the culmination of my career, but it was not my vision." All eyes were on Vance. The room was utterly silent. A project of this magnitude is not the work of a committee. It is the work of a single, unifying vision, the product of a mind that sees not just what is, but what could be, an artist and an engineer in one soul. It has been my profound honor to serve that vision, to provide the resources to bring it to life. He scanned the room, his eyes seeming to pierce through the darkness. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great privilege to introduce you to the man who dreamed all of this into existence. The master planner, the lead designer, the visionary architect of the Seacliff Estate, Mr. Liam Sterling." For a moment, nothing happened. The name just hung there. Chloe's brain struggled to process it. Liam Sterling. It had to be a different Liam Sterling. It was impossible. The man she knew lived in a dingy apartment and played with Legos. Then a single spotlight shot across the room, illuminating a table near the front that had gone unnoticed. A figure stood up. He was tall and lean, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He moved with an easy, confident grace. He turned toward the stage, and the light caught his face. It was him. It was Liam. But it was a Liam she had never seen before. The perpetual weariness around his eyes was gone, replaced by a clear, focused intensity. The slump in his shoulders had vanished, replaced by a posture of quiet authority. He didn't look like a ghost at the feast. He looked like he owned the feast. A wave of shock rippled through the ballroom. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. Her wine glass trembled in her hand, and a few drops of red spilled onto her emerald gown, looking like blood. Mark stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. This was not possible. This broke all the rules of the world as he understood it. Liam walked to the stage, not with a swagger, but with the calm purpose of a man who knows exactly where he is going. He shook Arthur Vance's hand and turned to face the crowd. He didn't scan the room for his ex-wife. He didn't seem to notice her at all. "Thank you, Arthur," he began, his voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone. It was the same voice that had diagnosed the flaws in Mark's blueprints, but now it filled the vast hall. "A vision is nothing without a believer, and Arthur, you were the first." He didn't talk about revenge. He didn't talk about his personal journey. He talked about the work. He spoke with passion and precision about the responsibility of architects to build not just for clients, but for communities, for the future. He spoke of beauty, function, and integrity as a single, indivisible concept. Behind him, the screen came to life again, this time with detailed renderings. A community center that used rainwater for its cooling systems. Residential homes with living roofs that changed with the seasons. And then a final image appeared. A stunning, singular house perched on the most dramatic point of the cliff. A masterpiece of glass and cedar that seemed to be in dialogue with the ocean itself. "Every resident of Seacliff is a custodian of this special place," Liam said, "and I'm no exception." A small, wry smile touched his lips. "That one's mine." The crowd erupted in applause, but Arthur Vance held up a hand for silence. He wasn't finished. "Liam's vision of integrity goes beyond just his own work," Vance announced, his voice turning steely. "In the course of our work at Seacliff, we had to conduct extensive geological and structural reviews of the entire region. And what we found was disturbing." Chloe felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. "We found evidence of a pattern of negligence by certain high-volume luxury builders, cutting corners on materials, falsifying inspection reports, ignoring geological risks. These practices don't just cheat the homeowners, they endanger the public. That is why the Vance Foundation is partnering with the District Attorney's Office to fund a new task force on construction fraud." Vance looked directly, it seemed, at Mark. "And their first investigation," he said, his voice dropping like a guillotine, "will be into the firm of Peterson Luxury Homes." The name landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. Mark stumbled back a step, as if he'd been punched. The city councilman who had been laughing with him moments before now took a deliberate step away, his face a mask of sudden, intense interest in a nearby floral arrangement. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Chloe didn't hear it. All she could hear was the roaring in her own ears. The world she had so carefully constructed, the world built on a foundation of status and illusion, had just been demolished in a single, elegant, devastating blow. On stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights, stood the architect of her destruction. And he hadn't even had the decency to look angry. The gala, which had been a symphony of self-congratulation, devolved into a cacophony of whispers. The air, once thick with expensive perfume, now crackled with the electricity of scandal. Mark's phone, which had been silent on the table, began to vibrate with a frantic, incessant buzz. He stared at the screen, his face ashen. The caller ID read, "Peterson." He silenced it. A second later, it buzzed again. "Marcus Rathbone, legal." People were looking at them, not with admiration anymore, but with a kind of morbid curiosity, the way drivers slow down to look at a car wreck. The men who had been eager to shake Mark's hand now found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. The women who had air-kissed Chloe now offered tight, pitying smiles from a safe distance. They were radioactive. "We have to get out of here," Mark hissed, grabbing Chloe's arm. His grip was painfully tight. "Liam," Chloe whispered, her eyes still fixed on the stage. He was being mobbed, but in a different way than they were. The mayor was shaking his hand. A famous actress was touching his arm, her face alight with admiration. He looked serene, centered, a calm island in the middle of a storm of his own creation. He had never looked more powerful. He had never looked more handsome. "Liam!" she called out, a desperate, pathetic cry that was lost in the din. She had a mad urge to push through the crowd, to get to him, to explain. To explain what? That she had made a terrible mistake? That she had bet on the wrong horse? "Forget him," Mark snarled, his voice a venomous whisper. "He did this. This was all a setup. The bastard played us." He started pulling her toward the exit, his progress clumsy and conspicuous. The drive back to their new house, their fraudulent, potentially dangerous house, was a suffocating tableau of silent fury. Mark gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Chloe stared out the window, replaying the night in her head, each detail a fresh twist of the knife. Liam's quiet confidence, the beauty of his designs, the way Arthur Vance had looked at him, with a mixture of pride and paternal affection. The final killing blow of the investigation. She had left Liam because she thought he was small. She had thought his world was constrained, his ambitions limited to their rented house and his modest salary. She had failed to understand that his world wasn't small, it was just internal. He had been building empires in his mind, drawing blueprints for a new reality while she was busy redecorating their living room. She hadn't been married to a man of small ambitions. She had been married to a king who was living, for a time, in disguise. And she, in her blindness, had cast him out. They pulled into the sweeping driveway of their architectural statement. The house, which hours before had seemed like a palace, now looked like a mausoleum. The dramatic, double-height atrium, lit from within, seemed garish and hollow. Mark killed the engine. The silence in the car was heavier than any sound. "This is your fault," he finally said, his voice flat and dead. "My fault?" Chloe choked out, her voice rising with incredulous outrage. "How is this my fault?" "You're the one who brought him back into our lives," he spat, turning to face her. His face was a mask of ugly rage. "The party, the planning department, you kept pushing him in my face, this ghost of your pathetic past. He was supposed to be nothing, a footnote, but you couldn't let it go. And he used it. He used you to get to me." It was a monstrous, twisted version of the truth. But in his panic and fury, Mark believed it. He needed someone to blame, and she was the closest target. The foundation of their relationship, which she had mistaken for love, but was merely a shared lust for status, was cracking under the first real pressure it had ever faced. Chloe looked at the man she had left her husband for, the man she had thought was a winner. He looked small and frightened and mean. The illusion shattered, leaving only the ugly reality. She had traded a man who built things for a man who only knew how to acquire them. She had traded substance for smoke. And as she sat there, trapped in the luxurious prison of her own making, she finally understood the full, devastating scope of her error. The problem wasn't that she had underestimated Liam. The problem was that she had never known him at all. The weeks that followed the gala were a slow, agonizing dissection of Mark's life. The investigation into Peterson Luxury Homes was swift and brutal. The district attorney, sensing a high-profile case that would play well in the media, was relentless. Peterson, facing jail time, quickly turned state's evidence, providing a roadmap of fraud that led directly to his clients who had encouraged and paid for the corner cutting. Mark's name was at the top of the list. His assets were frozen. His lines of credit dried up. Business partners who had once courted him now refused to take his calls. The world he had built, a world propped up by leverage and reputation, collapsed with astonishing speed. The society pages that had once celebrated his rise now chronicled his fall with lurid glee. The house, their great monument, became a symbol of their ruin. Inspectors descended upon it, their reports confirming everything Liam had warned them about and more. It was declared structurally unsound and unsafe for habitation. They were forced to move out, back into a rented condo that felt like a cage. The house itself sat empty on the hillside, a gleaming white tombstone marking the death of their dreams. Their relationship, deprived of the oxygen of success, suffocated. The arguments were constant, circular, and vicious. He blamed her for bringing Liam into their orbit. She blamed him for his arrogance, for not listening, for building their life on a lie. One afternoon, Chloe sat in the sterile living room of the condo, listening to Mark scream at his lawyer on the phone, when her own phone rang. It was her mother. "Chloe, darling, are you all right?" Eleanor began, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "I saw the papers. It's just dreadful." "I'm fine, Mother," Chloe said, her voice weary. "It's him, isn't it?" Eleanor said, her tone hardening. "It's Liam. This is his doing. I can't believe he would be so vindictive, so cruel, after everything we did for him." Chloe almost laughed. "Everything we did for him? Mother, we treated him like dirt." There was a shocked silence on the other end of the line. "Well," Eleanor finally sputtered, "that's no reason for him to ruin our lives. He has to fix this. He has to call off the investigation. He owes us that." "He owes us nothing," Chloe said. "Don't be naive, Chloe. He's powerful now. He knows people. He needs to make this right. For the family." Eleanor's voice was taking on its familiar, commanding tone. "In fact, I think I'll call him myself. He was always so fond of me." Before Chloe could protest, Eleanor had hung up. Chloe sank back into the sofa, a sense of impending doom washing over her. Liam was in his office at Seacliff. It wasn't an office so much as a glass-walled perch overlooking the entire project, the ocean stretching to the horizon. He was reviewing plans for the community's organic farm when his assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Sterling, there's an Eleanor Vance on the line. She says it's a personal matter." Liam took a deep breath, a flicker of the old weariness passing over his face before he composed himself. "Put her through, Sarah." "Liam, thank God I got through," Eleanor began, her voice a syrupy blend of relief and entitlement. "Liam, you have to help us. This whole situation is a terrible misunderstanding." Liam leaned back in his chair, gazing out at the endless blue of the Pacific. He listened. He let her talk. She rambled for several minutes, a long, self-pitying monologue about Chloe's distress, Mark's unfair persecution, the damage to their family's reputation. She never once congratulated him on his success. She never acknowledged his achievement. It was all about what he could do for them. When she finally paused for breath, Liam spoke, his voice preternaturally calm. "Eleanor," he said, "let me ask you a question. Do you remember your 40th anniversary party?" The question caught her off guard. "My party? What does that have to do with anything?" "It has everything to do with it," Liam said, his voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel. "Do you remember Mark, in front of his friends, calling my life's work little drawings? And do you remember how you and Chloe just stood there, saying nothing?" "Well, it was a party," Eleanor stammered. "People were drinking. Mark has a robust sense of humor." "I see," Liam said. "And do you remember when Chloe and I ran into you at the farmer's market, and you spent 10 minutes talking about Mark's new Porsche, and never once asked me about my work, my health, or my life?" Liam didn't let her finish. He wasn't angry, he was simply balancing the ledger. This was his list of grievances, delivered not with heat, but with the cold, clear finality of a closing statement. Do you remember when Mark and Chloe came to my office, demanding my help with their bureaucratic snag? I gave them the truth. I told them their house was a death trap. I warned them, and they laughed in my face. They called me jealous. He paused. He could hear Eleanor's shallow breathing on the other end of the line. "This isn't something I did to you, Eleanor," he said, the words precise and devastating. "This is the logical outcome of a series of choices that you, Chloe, and Mark made. You chose status over substance. You chose arrogance over humility. You chose a house of cards over a solid foundation. The wind has blown, and the house has fallen. It's as simple as that." He stood up and walked to the vast window, watching a hawk ride the thermal updrafts from the cliff. "I am not a vindictive man," he continued. "The investigation into Peterson Homes would have happened eventually. My project simply accelerated the timeline because my standards for safety and integrity expose their lack of them. The consequences you are facing are not my creation. They are your own." He let the silence stretch, a final, damning verdict. "Please don't call me again," he said, his voice softening with a trace of pity, but no less final for it. "The account is closed." He hung up the phone. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel joy. He felt a profound, cleansing sense of peace. A chapter of his life, a long and painful one, was finally, irrevocably, over. The final collapse was as swift as it was brutal. With his reputation in tatters and criminal charges pending, Mark did what he had always done. He looked for the escape hatch. He drained the last of his accessible cash, booked a one-way flight to a country with no extradition treaty, and disappeared, leaving Chloe with a mountain of legal bills, a phantom of a marriage, and the full weight of their shared failure. The great partnership, forged in ambition, dissolved in disgrace. The narrative of Chloe's life underwent a radical, brutal revision. The designer clothes were sold on consignment. The luxury condo was given up for a small, dingy apartment that was, ironically, not much different from the one she had so disdained when Liam lived there. The friends who had flocked to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a pariah, a living cautionary tale in the society circles she had once so desperately wanted to conquer. Humiliation was a constant companion. She took a job as a hostess at a mid-range chain restaurant, the kind of place she and Mark would have sneered at. She wore a cheap polyester uniform and a name tag that read, Chloe. She seated happy couples and boisterous families, her smile a fragile, plastered-on mask. The arrogance that had been her armor was stripped away, sanded down by the relentless friction of daily survival. She learned the meaning of a budget. She learned the exhaustion of being on her feet for 8 hours. She learned humility, the hard way. Sometimes at night she would search for news of Liam. He was no longer just an architect. He was a public figure, a thought leader. He gave TED Talks about sustainable design. He sat on boards for arts and environmental charities. The Seacliff estate was a global landmark, a symbol of a better future. And his home, the Precipice, was the most famous house in the country. Pictures of it were everywhere. She would stare at the images of the clean lines, the warm wood, the glass walls that seemed to invite the ocean inside. And she would feel a longing so sharp it was a physical pain. It was not a longing for the house itself, but for the world it represented. A world of integrity, beauty, and purpose. A world she had been offered once and had thrown away. 2 years passed since the gala. 3 years almost to the day since the divorce. One bleak, rainy Tuesday, after a particularly grueling shift where a customer had recognized her and snidely asked if she was researching a role, Chloe reached her breaking point. She went home, looked at her pale, defeated face in the bathroom mirror, and made a decision. She didn't know what she hoped to accomplish. An apology? Forgiveness? Absolution? She only knew she couldn't continue to live in the wreckage. She had to face the source of it all. The journey was a pilgrimage of penance. She took a city bus to the end of the line, then another that went partway up the coast. From there, she walked. The road to the Seacliff estate was not designed for pedestrians. It was a long, winding private drive that snaked up the cliffside. The rain had stopped, but a cold, damp wind blew in from the sea, whipping her thin jacket and tangling her hair. She passed the main gate where a discreet sign read, Seacliff, Private Community. There was a guard, but he simply watched her pass, perhaps assuming she was staff. She followed the signs for the precipice. The walk took nearly an hour. With each step, the scale of Liam's achievement became more apparent. The landscaping was perfect. The air was clean. The silence broken only by the cry of gulls and the distant roar of the surf. This was not a place. It was a philosophy. And then she was there. The house was even more stunning in person. It didn't sit on the land. It was part of it, a perfect fusion of human ingenuity and natural grace. The front door, a massive pivoting slab of rich, warm cedar, was at the top of a short flight of granite steps. To the side of the door was the knocker, a polished brass wave. She stood there for a long time, the wind tearing at her, her courage failing. What was she doing here? What could she possibly say? She had rehearsed 100 speeches in her head, but they all felt hollow and false now, in the face of this monumental reality. She thought of Mark, of her mother, of the life she had lost, and she thought of Liam, the quiet, steady man she had so casually broken. A sob caught in her throat. She had to do this. She had to close the circle. With a trembling hand, she reached out and lifted the heavy brass knocker. It was cold, solid, real. She let it fall. The sound was small, insignificant against the grandeur of the house and the vastness of the ocean. She knocked again, more firmly this time. And as she stood there, waiting, the tears she had held back for so long finally came. Hot and bitter, a deluge of regret. She was crying before the door even opened. The door didn't swing open. It pivoted, a silent, perfectly balanced movement that spoke of masterful engineering. Liam stood in the opening. He was not in a tuxedo, but in simple, comfortable-looking gray trousers and a dark blue cashmere sweater. He was holding a book, his finger marking his place. He was not surprised to see her. He had seen her on the long walk up the drive on his security monitors, a small, solitary figure battling the wind. He didn't smile, but his eyes, which had once held such weary pain and later such focused intensity, were now simply calm. There was no anger in them, no triumph, only a quiet, waiting stillness. He said nothing. He just waited. Chloe's carefully rehearsed speeches evaporated. All that was left was the raw, ugly truth. "Liam," she began, her voice a choked, broken thing. I'm so sorry." The words were a torrent, tumbling out in a rush of shame and desperation. "I'm sorry. For everything. For the way I treated you. For what I said. For leaving. I was so stupid. So blind. I thought Mark's world was the one I wanted. The money, the parties, the house. It was all so shallow. It was all a lie." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, a gesture so unlike the poised, perfect woman she had once been. "He's gone, Liam. Mark. He left. Took everything and just disappeared. The house is gone. My mother, she doesn't speak to me anymore. She blames me. Everyone does. And they're right. It was my fault. I chose this. I chose wrong." She finally ran out of words, her confession hanging in the salty air between them. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. For what? She didn't know. For him to shout at her? To forgive her? To invite her in from the cold? Liam listened to it all without changing his expression. He let her finish, let the silence settle again, broken only by the sound of the wind and the distant waves. Finally, he spoke. His voice was not cold, but it was not warm either. It was the voice of a man who had moved on, who was looking back at a distant shore. "What is it you want, Chloe?" he asked. The question was simple, direct, and utterly disarming. Did she want money? He had billions. Did she want a place to stay? He had a house with more rooms than he could ever use. Did she want him back? The thought was so audacious, so impossible, that it died before it could even form. "I don't know," she whispered, the words a raw admission of her own emptiness. "I don't know. Forgiveness, maybe. I needed to say it. To you. I was blind, and I'm sorry." He gave a single, small nod, an acknowledgement of her truth. "Yes," he said, "you were." He didn't say, "I forgive you." The words would have been a lie. Forgiveness was a transaction, an absolution he was not in a position to grant. The damage was too deep, the history too painful. But acceptance, that was something different. He did not step aside to let her in. The threshold of his home was a boundary he would not let her cross. This house, this life, was built on the foundations of integrity and peace, and her chaotic energy had no place here. But he did not send her away empty-handed. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out, not a checkbook, but a slim, elegant business card. "This is Helen Gable," he said, holding the card out to her. "She's the head of project coordination for a commercial construction firm I work with sometimes. They're good people, solid. They're looking for an administrative manager for their downtown office. It's not glamorous. The pay isn't what you're used to, but it's a real job. It requires organization, attention to detail, and hard work. Things I suspect you've learned a lot about recently." He was not offering her charity. He was not saving her. He was offering her a tool, a single, solid step she could take to begin building something of her own. A life based not on who she knew or what she wore, but on what she could do. It was the most profound act of grace he could offer, rooted not in a lingering affection for her, but in his unwavering belief in the power of meaningful work. Chloe looked from the card to his face. She saw no pity there, no lingering love, but she saw something that was perhaps more valuable: respect. Not for the woman she had been, but for the possibility of the woman she might yet become. She took the card. Her fingers brushed his for a fleeting second. "Thank you," she said, and it was the first honest, unburdened thing she had said to him in years. "Thank you, Liam." He gave another small nod. And then he gently pivoted. The massive door closed, the sound a soft, definitive click. Liam stood in his entryway for a moment, the silence of his home enfolding him. He walked through the living area, past the comfortable, understated furniture and the shelves filled with books, to the great glass wall that faced the ocean. He looked out at the endless horizon, the churning gray water meeting the pale sky. On his desk, a beautiful, minimalist structure of walnut and steel, sat a small, intricately carved wooden block. It was the prototype from years ago, the one he used to keep in his pocket, a talisman against the world's disdain. He picked it up. Its familiar weight and complex, interlocking joints felt good in his hand. It was a reminder of where he had come from, a symbol of the complex, beautiful thing he had built from the ruins of his old life. He was not a man defined by his pain, but a man shaped by his ability to build his way out of it. He was at peace. What Chloe did with that business card, we don't know. Whether she made the call, whether she got the job, whether she managed to build a new life on a foundation of her own hard work, that's a story for another day. Liam's story with her was over. He gave her a chance, not to re-enter his life, but to restart her own. And sometimes, that's the greatest gift you can give someone. Not forgiveness, but a chance at redemption. What do you think? Did Liam do the right thing? What would you have done in his shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If you found value in this story, please give it a like and subscribe for more. Until next time, remember that your true worth isn't in what you have, but in what you build.